Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to a special edition of Workplace Stories. This week, we got to sit down with Lisa K. Solomon and Jeff Rogers. Lisa is a best-selling author, a futurist, and a strategic designer that is focused on helping leaders build the skills to navigate complexity in the future. She is a designer in residence at the D School at Stanford and the author of a couple of books, The Moments of Impact and Design a Better Business. Jeff Rogers is a strategist, a facilitator, and a learning designer focused on innovation, leadership, and futures thinking. He's a principal at Radical, a co-founder of the event experience agency Trajectory, and a longtime workshop leader for the Singularity Group. The reasons that we wanted to talk to Lisa and Jeff are twofold. First of all, they are the designers that are helping us put together the Elevate conference and the experience that participants in that conference will have. But secondly, you might have heard me mention the word future in both of their bios. Lisa and Jeff are first and foremost future thinkers. They believe that future thinking is really important. And we had a conversation about this that I thought was really interesting. A few things that stood out to me. The first one is that they both talked about the fact that futures thinking isn't a luxury. It's a leadership muscle that leaders need for the future. They really challenged the notion that this idea of foresight is some far off academic exercise. And instead, they framed it as a really practical leadership tool and one that helps us make better decisions today by asking questions about what might happen in the future. The second thing that really stood out to me is this notion that design isn't just what you make. It's not the thing. It's what it makes possible, especially when you're talking about experiences. So Lisa pushed us to rethink design in general. It's not about drawing the blueprints and controlling the outcomes. It's much more about creating the conditions for new ideas to emerge. This resonated a lot with Stacia and I because we're both systems thinkers. And so this idea of making it serve a purpose rather than just making it was really interesting to us. The third thing that stood out to me was this idea that the most dangerous future is one that you've already decided on. One of my favorite parts of this episode was when Jeff talked about the quote unquote official future, the unspoken assumptions that organizations are often operating under. And he actually warned about these assumptions, that they can lock us in and blind us to the signals that things are going to be changing in the future. And the final thing I want to draw out of this episode, which again, you really should listen to, it was fantastic, is what we need now as far as leadership goes is curiosity and humility and each other. It was a really human conversation, which I really loved. When I asked what they hope people will walk away from this Elevate experience that we're going to have as Red Thread, their answers stuck with me. Real relationships, really practical tools, and the courage to try something new. Jeff shared a quote that's probably worth writing down. He said, "We don't know enough to be pessimistic." And I think that sums up their whole approach and this conversation as well. We hope you enjoy listening to it. They are fantastic thinkers and really great designers. If you like this episode, please subscribe, tell all your friends about it. And if you like some of the research that we're putting out at Red Thread Research, please become a member. Hey, Jeff and Lisa, thanks for joining us.
Oh, we're so happy to be here, Dani and Stacia.
Yeah. Well, as we get started, can you both just give us a little bit of background on yourselves? And Lisa, let's go with you first.
Sure. So, for multiple decades now, I've been helping leaders build the skill set to navigate increasingly uncertain contexts and industries and helping them build skills that allow them to see a wider range of possible solutions and opportunities and how to bring them to life. That's like at the high level. In many ways, I think about it as a combination of instilling leaders with futures thinking, with strategic foresight, and also the skills of design. And in that case, I think of design as the ability to bring new ideas to life that don't necessarily have precedent through both practices of discovery and experimentation. So I spend a lot of time currently teaching at the Stanford D School, where I bring those skills to life in various classes. But at the core, it's about helping leaders be more successful in times that are increasingly filled with volatility and uncertainty.
I love that. We met you several years ago, and since we've had an opportunity to interact with you on a couple of the things that you've designed, early on in planning for this event for Elevate, you mentioned, I do big design projects like, how do you redesign democracy? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a cool idea. How do you take these big, huge things? Because mostly when people think of design, they think of a room or a space or something like that. And you think much broader and bigger. And we love the fact that process gets people out of their heads and their space and their mindsets and all of the things and allows them to think bigger. Jeff, tell us about you.
Hello. Very happy to be here, especially be here with Lisa as well. But yeah, I have a pretty wildly non-linear trajectory, but I was supposed to be a historian. That's what I did my grad work in. Yeah, something we have in common, Stacia. I wound up dropping out of a PhD program in history, but I had developed and maybe held on to an interest in thinking about contingencies, about paths taken versus not taken that enable an eventual future that might seem unlikely at the time, and cut my teeth professionally in youth leadership development and also experiential learning design. And although I then knocked around through corporate training and working in ed tech a little bit, I eventually found my way into facilitation and foresight and futures, and actually find now, many years later, some of the things that I think I still really draw upon and base my practice around and my design approach is actually the stuff that I learned trying to become a historian and doing lots of teaching in a bunch of different environments and really trying to focus on immersion and experiential learning and fostering collaboration and conversation. And I think that's really the way to tap people's curiosity. And if you're going to talk about the future, you want to be engaging curiosity and imagination.
Yeah, I love that you both mentioned foresight, like this idea of thinking past where we are right now, because I think we're in a place where we've never been before, obviously, and it's crazy out there. So I love that you're bringing different strengths, and that the reason that we tapped both of you is because we're very interested in taking advantage of the minds in the room rather than having somebody on the stage tell us how it's going to be for the next 15 years. So thank you both for joining us.
We're so thrilled. I just want to pick up a little bit on Jeff's background around having a deep appreciation for creating immersive conditions for learning, and why we're so excited to work with you, Dani and Stacia, and why I've been such big fans of your work, because I feel like you are champions of the learning function within organizations at the most strategic level. And I think Jeff and I would both agree that the key to unlocking strategic foresight for all leaders, and especially learning leaders, is unleashing them to really apply learning practices more broadly with a longer time horizon in more expansive ways that have an impact on every aspect of the organization. And we're really excited to learn from the folks that are coming to Elevate about what is happening on that front and how to create a shared understanding of the just higher level of importance of what at least I call learning forward. We obviously can't predict the future with any definity, but we can explore it. We can sense it. We can push the boundaries of what's available today in new ways. And that's only useful if you learn from it. Just visiting it just will hold it in a static moment, and then you forget it. It's like, what can we actually do? How do we learn? How do we bring others into the conversation? And how do those conversations lead to real action?
I want to focus a little bit more on that, Lisa, because so many people, when you talk to them about the future and futurists and all this stuff, like there's a part of them that says, okay, that's good to know. But then how do I do my real work today? There's this sense of disconnect that some people have. But in the conversations we've had with you over the 7 years that we've known you, and with Jeff as well, there is a real practicality to the work that you do and a real applicability. So can you maybe explain for folks, how do you blend this futurist approach with what you need to know today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Stacia. I think a lot about it. And it really comes back from deep work that I did almost 2 decades ago in scenario planning with a firm that no longer exists, but practices that exist, from a group called the Global Business Network, founded by Peter Schwartz, who really helped lead the scenario work within Shell that was so successful in the 80s, started by Stuart Brand as well, who's a great big thinker about long futures and long nows. And what I've learned is that when we say, oh, we're going to do a futurist exercise, it can really turn people off. When I say, hey, let's have a conversation about what's unfolding and how we can discover together the trends in play and the implications that they might have and how they tie back to the strategic conversations and our current planning, that's a much more accessible approach to thinking about this work. Because as you said, at the end of the day, it's about integration into our work. It's about naming, hey, are we zooming out long term? Or are we focused on the near term? And not confusing those things. So many of our organizations, I think, run by these kind of lens of the near termism, the like must get to the quarterly results, annual plan, strategic 3-year plan. And we forget like, hey, first of all, those are made up, honestly, like someone like those boundaries in place. So we would feel like we would have some control over the future, which actually, while it feels more comforting in the moment, actually really leaves us exposed to being blindsided by the future. It's a long way of saying a lot of the work, it's going to sound a little meta, is designed to be appropriate for leaders. And as you both know, many years ago, I co-authored a book about designing strategic conversations to accelerate change that specifically focuses on emerging challenges that don't have single right answers. So I think a big part of what Jeff and I are excited to do is to create an environment where people have those conversations freely. And we reduce the barriers of it being conversations only for an elite few, but in fact are important and relevant for all of us. And if we do our job right, that folks will be leaving Elevate with the ability to actually facilitate those same kinds of conversations in their organizations.
So I actually love the fact that you went meta there, Lisa, because that's exactly what we're doing, right? We're talking about some of these big challenges that people have, but we're doing it in a way that hopefully they can replicate when they get home. I was at a conference last week and was sitting in the front row just about ready to go up on stage. And I heard a conversation behind me and somebody was asking a woman, hey, what do you think of the conference so far? And she said, I think it's basically a representation of everything that we tell people not to do as far as learning and development. And I was like, yes, that is very true. And so I'm glad we're stepping out of that and taking advantage of the people in the room to have some of these bigger discussions.
Absolutely. And I will say, I'm so excited because Jeff is my absolute favorite partner to do this work with. There's no one that brings more energy and liveliness and instant sort of synthesis about what's happening. I think as Jeff described his background, being attuned to what's happening in the room and being able to adapt and model that critical part of leadership that really is about co-creating what's happening with a scaffold that was designed to invite people to be generative and curious from the beginning. That's really where magic happens. Yeah. Jeff, do you like I get to talk about you in the third person with you actually on the
If I could take this also as an invitation to hop in on this like practical side of futures and foresight, this is like a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I find so many conversations people come into with maybe a little bit of a misconception about futures not being for them or not being a thing that actually has a practical side. And it can feel abstract or academic or just lost in dense jargon. And I recently had a chance to apply one of my favorite kind of introductions to working with futures, actually making them useful and valuable and actionable in a program. And I think I may have mentioned this to Lisa, but I think it's a really nice illustrative story for the idea that we all have this capacity and are actually just underutilizing it or undervaluing it in our professional lives. The short version of it is this. Went into a program recently with a group of executives. This was in healthcare. And as we were getting into the futures and foresight piece, we asked them all to do a quick conversation, a quick interview with someone in their life that they really cared about. We suggested a child if they had one, or maybe a partner, someone who meant a lot to them, and ask that person to envision their life in 10 or 15 years' time and to tell them about it. What does that future look like? What do they want it to look like in 10 or 15 years' time? And this person came back and gave them a little bit of a sketch of their desired future, what they hoped that their life and their world would look like. And then we asked these executives to come back and tell us about it, tell each other. And they all did. And just naturally, they also started talking about What in that vision resonated with them? What surprised them? What actually started to stir up questions about what their role in that future was and how they could actually work to support it? And they started actually just very naturally working backward from a future vision to ask what they could do today to make that thing more likely. How could they actually support this person toward the future that they wanted to wind up with? And that's what it's all about. What it is all about is using that vision of the future to inform your present practice, get a new perspective on your decisions. Am I actually living and leading in a way that honors the values that my future self or this person in my life is going to hold down the line? What am I doing with that? And we all have this capacity. And again, I would argue that we probably just undervalue it. It's like a creative superpower that's unique to humans, that we can work with visions of the future to better understand our options and our potential in the present. So why not? It's awesome. Love it.
So I'm fascinated by this because you and Lisa have both talked about envisioning the future, and you just gave us a really good idea of what that could look like and this sort of spontaneous nature of it. I've been in L&D for quite a while, and I know that it isn't spontaneous. Like, those types of activities aren't spontaneous. You all have talked about the way that you create or design the thing so that you get to the thing. I don't know how exactly to ask this question, but I'd love to understand a little bit about what goes into the thought process in creating the thing that you want, the ability of those leaders to think differently about their future or apply it. I don't even know if it's a model, but how do you get to that kind of outcome, the one that you just talked about, Jeff?
I think there are a lot of ways in, which is good because it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all approach depending on what is the organizational context, who's in the room, what are their goals, all of that. But for me, there are a couple of kind of common threads here. One is recognizing the difference between future and futures, plural, that very often we act as though we all have a common conception about what the world is going to be like. And very often that is based on a bunch of expectations and assumptions that we're not actually validating, or we're not validating frequently enough. Lisa mentioned Peter Schwartz previously. He introduced this idea of the official future, that every organization, and I would argue every organizational leader, is operating with an idea of what the world is going to look like. And they're always executing and designing against that. But especially in a context of high uncertainty, volatility, accelerating change, a world not unlike our own, we need to examine those assumptions and expectations perhaps a little bit more frequently and maybe get some different perspectives in on them so that we can see which ones actually hold up. And where is there greater potential for change? And what might we, if we're thinking outside in, what might we identify as potential drivers of change that are maybe being undervalued and can actually open that aperture a little bit wider so that we can see a range of possible futures? And then start to think about, again, what could we do in the near term to influence those futures, maybe make one of them a little more likely? Can we innovate in that direction? Can we learn in that direction? Or if there's one we really don't want to wind up with, what could we start doing today to build resilience against or reduce our exposure to risk?
Yeah. So this is for the historians in the room, Jeff and Stacia. I'm really interested in when we decided on a future for an organization. And it feels like it's put everybody's mindsets in concrete. Like, we are designing to this particular outcome, and that's all we're doing. Recently, Stacia and I have been hearing a ton about the need for agility and flexibility. And like, we can no longer, 5-year plans are out the window. We're now planning for 6 months to a year out. What happened in history where we decided that one future was even possible? It's never been possible, right?
Jeff is the combined historian futurist, but I will start with just the historian perspective. And I would argue that when that became a thing, sorry to my consulting friends out there, but was probably when consulting firms started deciding they needed to sell a vision of the future and rally people around it for the sake of selling and delivering consulting. Having scenario planning is not a new thing. It's not a new thing in organizations, not a new thing in governments, et cetera. But a lot of that was often done behind closed walls. There wasn't this big picture vision. But as consultants started to figure out how are we going to design and deliver services more efficiently, or effectively, you have to paint a vision for what must be. And then you have to offer your services to deliver to that may be a jaded view. Apologies, I do love consultants. Y'all offer some great things, but I think that's probably when we started to see this. Jeff, what do you think?
It all really depends on how galaxy brain you want me to go here, Dani. Like, there have always been different temporalities, different ways of thinking about time culturally. That is one key determinant. But just to narrow the scope of our conversation and talk about how this works with organizations and organizational leaders, particularly in a Western context, I think some of it is just for operational convenience. At some point, if you have flared and you've thought about many futures, you have to think about which one you're going to focus on driving toward, which one you are going to sell your stakeholders on. And for me, that's totally fine. It's fine to focus on a future at a certain point, but you also have to remember there's going to come a time when you need to take that wider view again. And you need to develop that ambidexterity where you can have a little bit of a both and. Like, we can think long term. We can also then bring it back to the near term. What are we going to do in the near term to better understand the path toward that long-term vision? And as we're taking the steps in the near term, that may help us refine and focus that long-term vision. But we have to operate with some idea of where we're going, because there are periods where an organization is going to make all the money by developing efficiencies and delivering on the things that it knows and doing those things really well. And then at some point, it needs to get back into that exploration mode and find new things to learn how to do so that it can actually continue to evolve and grow and maintain long-term relevance. I think it's futures, then future, then futures again, but that can be lost. It's not easy to do well.
I would argue, though, that in the highest performing organizations, they're doing those two things simultaneously. So you're marching towards potentially a shorter term defined future, while at the same time you're continually looking out and thinking, what are the futures that could exist with probably different weights on them, one of them being a continuation of the current state and others being other things. But if a company lets itself go into just stagnant efficiency mode, execution on efficiently, then the juices, as it were, to turn them back on for more innovation and creativity and exploring different futures is incredibly hard to get restarted. So I think that probably the best organizations are doing both.
Yeah, I do. And I just even want to take a step back to the original question of Dan, you asked, like, when did we focus in on one? And I think, unfortunately, it happens super early, like in our schooling, like super, super early. And if you think about how our K-12, and this is, of course, talking in the Western world here in the US, how we start to measure if a child is doing well, it's on measurable things, right? It's not on imagination. It's not on navigating ambiguity. It's not on agility. And what I now see, having the great privilege of teaching Stanford students, is that there's this huge gap in their skill set. Overall, I'm obviously generalizing, hugely, hugely talented and applying themselves towards a focal area, problem sets, all these things, particularly when we teach classes at the design school, when classes like Inventing the Future, which I teach, or View from the Future, and, say, look, this is not a class where there's a single problem set, right? A future. This is a chance for you to express yourself, for you to stretch, for you to take risks. A few are like, yes, class I've been waiting for. And there are a whole bunch that are like, what is this woman talking about? And so going back to a point that Jeff made around this incredible innate skill to be imaginative, to be anticipatory, things that have allowed us as a species to survive for tens of thousands of years, it is underappreciated in formal learning environments. And, would be curious to sort of take a look, and maybe this is a future, planting the seeds for future research on how we actually help leaders become more adaptable, more agile. We don't just say the words. Oftentimes when I'm with leaders, I'll start off by saying, look, how many people have taken a class in history? And it's like, yeah. I say, look, there's probably some math historians, even PhDs. It's a known thing. It's a discipline. We honor it. We understand that when done well, teaches us valuable lessons like pattern recognition and understanding context and historical thinking. But then I'll say, all right, well, how many people have actually taken a class in futures? Maybe one who says, I took a scenario planning. And then the final kicker, of course, is to say, which one can you influence? Oh, thud.
That's a really good point.
Wow. What? So The good news is, and I think the stance that Jeff and I take, and I'll maybe end this answer on this note, is with one of great empathy to say, here's the amazing things. You can learn that. We are all born with this gift of imagination, what psychologists call prospection. That is incredible. And so our job is to unleash it. And I think we center on the future, and then we have all these like made up things. As Jim Dater, another Futurist, would say, we are social inventors. Somebody invented the annual plan. Somebody invented OKRs. Somebody invented KPIs. Why? It feels safe. The empathy is there's safety in that. There's safety in identifying it. We're definitely not going to discount. There's value to that. I think what Jeff and I would say is in this world of increasingly rapid change, it's just incomplete. And so what we're trying to do is fill out the toolkit, right? Is to fill out the approaches, to say you are not without options. Our job is to create safe places for you to build those again.
Speaking of planting seeds, you want to come over and like maybe teach some of that to my my kids? But I did want to actually take a moment and move us on to the lightning round, because we're right about that time in the podcast. And so we have just a couple of questions for you two. This first one, I feel like maybe you've already even hit on, but
wait, do we get to buzz in?
It.
Is there?
You do.
Yeah, you do.
Ready. I got it.
Okay, number one. Question is, what is your superpower? Lisa's face went, yes?
But did she buzz?
But did she buzz? I don't know. Did you buzz?
I couldn't wait to hear Jeff's superpowers. He had so many. I was so excited to hear the answer.
I'm buzzing.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Jeff.
Okay. Mine, I believe, I mentioned that before I got into more of the innovation and foresight work, all that, I worked in youth leadership, and that is a great environment for practicing adaptability in front of a room, also modulating energy up and keeping people engaged with a little bit of a playful approach, even to challenging tasks and topics. And I believe that my superpower is bringing a little bit of that youth leadership, outdoor education, almost kind of summer camp feel to executive development and learning.
Dang. Elevate is right up your alley then, right?
I hope so. So excited.
Awesome.
You can call it like elevate, right? That's what he does. Superpower, elevate.
That's awesome.
Well, he also elevates his hair. I was wondering if that was going to be the superpower.
Oh no, we mentioned it.
In there. More intrigue. More intrigue.
Great. This is an audio medium.
I know.
Oh, this is how we're going to get
We have to
paid.
describe it.
I'll have to show up to elevate to see it. It is.
So Lisa, what about you? What's your superpower?
Yeah, I think my superpower is seeing connections that are not obvious, both connections within people. I love putting people together. Oh, you all need to meet. Here's why. And ideas. This idea that in many ways, creativity is not necessarily about new ideas, but having like other ideas pick up and connect and recombine. I love that. I feel like sometimes I'm that kid in Sixth Sense. I know it's a little morbid. You know, he sees dead people everywhere. Like I see connections and opportunity everywhere. And I love fostering conditions to help others find that too, because ultimately I think that's a core skill of agency. So I think when I can teach people to notice more, see what's possible, see what they can build on, and I model it, I think that's really powerful.
I love it. So you find the red threads, if you will. See what I did there?
Good. You should write that down. I feel like it would have been great if Lisa and I could have answered that last question for each other.
Oh, that would have been cool too.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, ooh, but I would have said similar, like the newlywed game. He said,
What does she think her superpower is?
oh my gosh.
Okay, we've got some others. What is your go-to karaoke song? Would be one.
Or we can start a fight and ask you if pizza should have pineapple on it.
Oh God, no, absolutely not. That's an easy
Come
one.
on, Jeff.
A hard disagree. I'm a maximalist when it
man.
comes. I don't particularly like pineapple that much, but I fully support anyone's right to go nuts on their pizza. I'll even put anchovies on pizza. Like, get it all in there, whatever.
Disagreement, Jeff. I think I just found our first whoa. No, I like pure ingredients. I'm a sort of simple pizza eater. Get me some great burrata and some cheese. I'm down for it.
That sounds good.
No pineapple, no. But I am a big believer that potato chips or some sort of chip factor goes well on just about everything. So that's a whole.
I agree with that for like burgers and things like that. I've
Oh,
never
yeah.
tried it on pizza. Sandwiches, yes, totally on board. with that.
In the sandwich for sure.
My Italian au pair will not do pineapple on
Good
pizza.
for-
It is
good for
one of
her.
her few drawbacks. God bless her. But she does do chips on pizza.
Really? Have you
It's
tried it?
salty.
I have not tried it, but I have heard that from her that it's delicious.
I think
I like a fried egg on a pizza.
Okay.
I'll do that. I'll do that.
All right. Back to our questions here.
I will say on the you asked a karaoke question, which is an interesting one. I will say it depends if the margarita is happening before or after the karaoke decision. I have been in situations where it felt like an awesome idea to sing Neil Diamond after partaking in a pitcher of margaritas, only to find out like, no, this is harder than I thought.
No. Singing Neil Diamond is always a great idea. Whether you do it well is a completely separate issue.
Yeah.
Should not be linked.
You actually didn't ask that question. You didn't ask
No.
that. You just said, should we do it? No.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Elevate itself. Now, Lisa, when we came to you and said, hey, we're going to do this thing, do you want to help out? What made you say yes? Why are you excited about Elevate and why do you think it's important right now?
I would say, quite honestly, the first reason why I said yes, there was a lot of reasons why I said yes, easy yes. The first reason I said yes is because of you, Stacia and Dani. I love what you do. I've loved what you've done from the very beginning. I have loved seeing how the industry has really appreciated your approach of being authentic, high integrity in service of the people that you are trying to support. And I have huge admiration for that. Increasingly, I'm all about working with people who are excellent at what they do. You both are that in all of the ways. So it has been such a joy to watch Red Thread take off and the kind of impact you've had. So that was an easy yes from the beginning. But the other easy yes is that I love who you work with. I am the daughter of a chief learning officer. My entire upbringing was around learning and the power of growth and development that can happen at every level, the micro level, the inter level, the team level, the organizational level. That is my frame for life. So I love working with learning leaders and people that get up every day to support other people. That's increasingly difficult right now. And your gift of distilling trends and research and helping those people that do that hard work every day be more successful because of the communities that they're a part of, the conversations that they're invited to join. This was just an absolute no-brainer to say yes to. And it became an extra no-brainer when Jeff Rogers agreed to work with me to support this effort. So already we have learned so much in preparing. And I'll just say one more thing. You asked an earlier question about like, how do we design for something like this? Again, as I shared earlier, Moments of Impact is really about the design process for, yes, strategic conversations, but learning environments like this. And the opening chapter is the most important leadership skill you've never been taught. I could say Jeff and I have already spent probably 10 minutes of design time to every 1 minute we'll be together. And we are learning as we do that, right? We both, I think, have so much deep appreciation for what you're doing and for what everyone in that room is doing. That's a privilege. That's a privilege to do that work.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
That gave me warm fuzzies. I want to jump in just a little bit more. Stacia and I have had a really interesting experience putting this conference together. So we knew from the beginning we wanted it to be different. We wanted to be interactive. And every single person we've run up against in the preparation for this conference has tried to drag us back to the middle.
Except for you all.
Except for you all. Yeah, tracks. They wanted tracks. They didn't want around the stage. Just silly little things that we saw differently about things. They didn't see the purpose of the Alpine slide. Like a lot of these things we wanted to turn on their head. And we had such a hard time getting even the vendors that were trying to help us do this to think differently about it.
Not our tech vendors, to be clear, like the vendors we're working with for the conference.
And I see this as a metaphor for kind of what you all were talking about earlier, right? Getting people to think differently about things. We knew we needed a different environment for that. But I'm wondering if either of you have an opinion on why it's so hard to break patterns when it comes to thinking differently.
I do have opinions. And also, this is a thing that's really important to me. I didn't get to say why I'm excited to be joining you all to Elevate, but a whole lot of it for me is your approach, that you are interested in making this interactive, collaborative, conversational, that there is going to be peer exchange and peer-to-peer learning, that it's not going to be like broadcast thing. And I am hugely into that. I'm also the co-founder of an event experience agency that's focused on attendee activation, like turning people into participants rather than a passive audience that is just receiving. The experience is much richer I think the learning is deeper. You're building community while building knowledge. And you can't do that in just a lean back, passive engagement mode. So I was thrilled to have that opportunity. Love your approach. Love that you had already brought Lisa on, and super excited about all that. But why is it hard? Even when people have the sense that something else is out there, that perhaps there is a need to do something new and different, that means stepping into uncertainty. It means getting away from the things that perhaps have served you well for a long time. And it's hard to let those go. It's hard to be new. It's hard to be a novice. Once again, it's hard to show up with lots of questions and not be someone, especially if you've been successful, who can have the answers. But I think that's where the learning is the richest. This is just like an axiomatic thing in learning science and design, that we actually learn more and learn faster when we don't have all the answers, when we're having to engage a little bit more, maybe even struggle a little bit more, maybe step into productive disequilibrium, which is a fancy way of saying distance from the comfort zone. But that's where the richness is. And it does take a little bit of courage and humility on the part of attendees and on the part of organizers to say, hey, we're going to try a different thing. We're going to make this collaborative and contingent, and we're going to co-create. But there's an element of risk there that I think a lot of people just aren't comfortable with, but the reward is higher.
I think it's interesting. Like, this whole conversation has gotten me thinking about this idea of faith, like faith that that you're going the right way into the future. I heard recently that the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. If you're certain about the thing, then you don't need faith to move into the future. Therefore, you don't have hope. Therefore, you're not thinking differently about things. Therefore, blah, 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 blah. I think we're coming out of a really certain time in history. Like, we knew what we knew, and we knew the systems and processes that worked and all of those types of things. And now we aren't. So it almost feels, and I'd love both of your takes on this. Like, it feels like we're on a burning platform. Like, the reason that we now have maybe the permission to doubt, which will help us change things, is because we can't continue the way that we are right now. Do you think it's that dire?
It's a great question. I will say one way that I've been trying to put, to borrow a phrase that I love from Jeff, some conceptual vocabulary around understanding this world that we're in right now. And some people call it VUCA, right? This volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. That was a term coined by military planners in the early 90s. And sometimes I think, they thought it was VUCA then. Preach it.
How cute.
Oh, right. Exactly. How quaint. The naming that, like, this day, today, may be our most simple day to come. Like, I don't see it getting less simple on its own. Now, we can adapt, right? That's the good news. And what we're all we can spend more time ourselves becoming more resilient, becoming more expansive in our responses. We are absolutely, from a kind of macro change level, experiencing multiple inflection points. And again, there's different terminologies for it. Some people call it the poly crisis right now, about all these major unravelings and changes that are happening that feel just beyond our sense of control or even, ability to understand it. I sometimes think in simple terms. I know we're audio chatting here, but I think back to the 2016 book that Thomas Friedman wrote called Thank You for Being Late. And in the opening chapter, he has this great chart from his conversation with Astro Teller, who is the captain of moonshots, the Google Moonshots X. And Astro Teller basically writes out an exponential curve. And he says, look, this is the rate of exponential tech. And we know that Moore's law, doubling power, different rate of change than the linear, which he draws, which is like human adaptability, and puts an X and says, we are on the exponential chart, on the exponential curve that is above human adaptability. I think, wow, that was really illustrative about these different levels and paces of change. But then you pause and you say, like, that was 9 years ago, friends. That curve is like nearly a straight line. We have tools, we've got coding, we've got the convergence of all these tools and more data, making this technology more powerful. And you might argue, not to be too controversial, but that human adaptability line, I think, is declining. It's flattening at the very least. Why? We have misinformation. We have lack of trust. We have our attention being fragmented, not a great input for learning and adaptability. We have politics and polarization it's tearing us apart, that's not putting us in our best learning stance, right? So we find ourselves as individuals in a constant state of heightened tension, heightened threat, that flight or freeze response, fight response. That's not our most generative selves. That's not our most creative moments. So we got to name that and we got to say, okay, what can we do to understand what's happening biologically in our nervous system in this moment? And again, how can we scaffold some different responses? It makes me more bullish on the importance of the work that we're all talking about here.
I couldn't agree more, particularly this point about the capability for human adaptability right now and some of the challenges we're facing. But given that, what do you hope people will come to the event with? What kind of mindset will they show up with that will enable them to get as much up that adaptability curve, that openness? What do people need to bring to the event?
For me, number one would be curiosity. I think having a curious approach to these conversations and to futures and to thinking about uncertainty actually allows us to shift in small but important ways. Curiosity allows us to see uncertainty as a space of possibility. And in that uncertainty and possibility, there is also opportunity. There is opportunity for things to be reimagined for the better, but that starts with curiosity. And we already talked a little bit about humility and courage. I'm going to bring into the conversation a quote that Lisa, our mutual friend, Alana Lipset, hipped me to recently. I love this, and I think it's very appropriate here. This is from Hazel Henderson, who's an environmentalist and futurist, wrote, "If we can recognize that change and uncertainty are basic principles, we can greet the future with the understanding that we do not know enough to be pessimistic."
Oh, I love that.
And there's a lot out there telling you to be pessimistic, but that futures mindset, the foresight approach, being able to see a range of possibility should allow us to see that the pessimistic, the worst case scenario, that is a possible outcome, but it's not the only outcome. And it might not even be the most probable outcome. And if we can come in curious to learn from each other, to take that outside-in approach, perhaps to have some of our expectations and assumptions challenged, and to really engage with the research, with the trends work that you all are bringing to the table to set it for a rich conversation, then we have an opportunity to really explore possibility and imagine what change can look like for the better.
Thank you. We have two final questions. The first one I'm going to ask here, which is around what you hope attendees will walk away with. So we just mentioned what we want them to come with, but what do you hope they're going to walk away with?
It's a great question. I always love designing backwards. And Jeff and I have definitely been thinking a lot about that in conversation with you all. I think more than anything, I want them to walk away with some concrete ideas that they're excited to explore further. That doesn't mean something that they must start, but something new that fuels their sense of agency and influence, that they're excited to advance in some concrete way, even if that means study more or bring in more. And ideally, that they feel that they're not doing it alone, that they have met someone or deepened a relationship or started a discovery together. And I just absolutely love Jeff's point about curiosity. I could not agree more, that they're excited to feel like that there's a path forward for them to embark on. It's not a promise, right? It's not a delivery. It's not a guarantee, but it's hopefully an elevated posture towards the future that is agentic, and ideally some new practices that make them feel more resilient and more open to the kinds of relationships that they can continue to build on to bring them to life.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have anything to add there?
Maybe just a distillation. I'm a big 3-2-1 guy. I'd love for people to walk away with 3 new meaningful connections. And I might even say friends, because I think it's so easy for us to say, I connected with 30 people on LinkedIn. Those don't matter. Those aren't real connections. People that you would actually call in a moment of professional crisis, or, hey, I'm really stuck here. Like someone that you would turn to. So 3 of those. 2 specific actionable practices or tools or strategies, like walk away with things that you can use and that are based on example, not just people's advice, but like, I have seen someone who is doing this thing and it is working to build in a direction that you value. That's awesome. And then 1 experiment that they plan to launch. Setting a learning agenda. What is the thing you're going to do to advance your knowledge? That could be a big question, but needs to be oriented toward experimentation and action. So 3 connections, 2 concrete strategies, practices, and then 1 experiment that you're going to launch in the near term.
I love that. That's what I hope too.
Awesome. I might even suggest that we use that at the event. I really like that framing, and I think it aligns very much with what Lisa was hoping to see come out.
That's awesome.
We always end our podcast with one question that I want you both to answer. And that question is, why do you do the work that you do? And Lisa, we'll start with you.
I love it. The simplest question, because it's always the hardest. Why do I do the work that I do? I feel very pulled to help as many people as possible feel like that they can shape their futures that they want to be a part of. Every day I get up and I think, how can I foster somebody's belief that the future doesn't have to happen to them? That their choice, even in the most micro way, can make a difference, can make a difference for themselves, can make a difference for the people that are around them, and can make a bigger difference for the future we want to be in. I've seen it. I've had this great gift of this career for many decades doing this work. And there is no greater gift when a student, for example, will say to me, I used to think the future was for other people to decide. And now I think I have the tools that I can build and grow in order to bring about the future I want to see to life. So when you get that kind of experience, you can't stop trying to do that.
I love that, Lisa. Jeff.
I clearly should not have let Lisa go first on this one. Damn it. I could give a lot of reasons, but to not give like a watered down version of what Lisa just said, I think I'll say that a lot of what motivates me to keep pursuing this work is the people that I get to do this kind of work with, the other folks who are interested in building these communities, exploring these practices, having these conversations. And Present Company, I think, is an absolute exemplary instance of this, that finding folks like yourselves, and I've been working with Lisa for almost 10 years now, and it's the work that brought us together. I don't know how I ever would have made that connection if I had not been exploring this field and interested in the same themes. And I think maybe the work self-selects for certain kind of people who have a certain kind of purpose in mind. And it is such a privilege and also so reassuring to know that you have folks like you all who are trying to convene these kinds of conversations. It's great to be part of them.
Lisa and Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
So fun. We can't wait for Elevate. It's going to be really wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.